there YouTube, Big G here, and I've spent the weekend tidying up my games room, moving a few things around, and I thought I'd do a little bit of an update on my games room. Put up some new shelves, and as you can see now I have enough space now for all my DS games, all in one long line, and it's actually worked out quite nicely. You can see some of my retro computers and a lot of the different carts for the different computers. I find this way I have a lot more space. My workbench uncluttered now, and I also managed to keep most of the systems that I spend most of my time on, like the Sega, the Spectrums and the Atari STs, as well as the Master System and the Tedelex and the SNES. I find I tend to play mostly those games when I have the urge. And as you can see, my DS collection has grown nicely. I have been focusing on the handheld systems, and in one of my previous videos I showed you how to use spare DS cases to make Game Boy Advance cases, and here you can see them, the ones that I've made so far for my Game Boy Advance games, and they actually came out very nicely. If you compare them to the original Game Boy Advance games, that I do enjoy about my new setup is that I get to use this lovely flat screen TV, which has full HD hooked up. You can see I have the multiple selector switches here, and I have the Wii, the SNES, the Master System, the Tedelex, as well as the GameCube, all hooked up there. The old 16-bit clone that I have there, that's also hooked up through a SCART cable. Then my different Spectrums are also hooked up via the component cables, and the Atari ST, which I hook up when needed. But otherwise, with very little effort, I can hook up and play whichever game I feel like playing at that time. So it actually works very nicely. And I don't have all my figurines and so forth here yet, but I'm slowly working on it. And while scratching through and repacking everything, what came to mind was what happens to our collections when we finally move on. And what brought this to mind was the fact that, if you can have a look over here, all these model kits, and there must be about 50 of these model kits. I was at an auction and there was a deceased estate, and there was a gentleman there that was retired. He had all these model kits, and a lot that were built as well. You can see I even purchased some of those of his that were already made, and this was just part of his collection. The gent died, and all these models ended up at the auction, and they were sold for next to nothing. And I'm sure he turned in his grave when he saw the prices that I paid for them. At the same time, or about just before that, I was at a second-hand store, and if you have a look here, all these Warhammer figurines, and there is a lot of them, all hand painted. I don't know if you can see with the reflection. Let me see if I can get a little bit closer. All lead pewter figurines, all hand painted. Must have taken hours and hours and hours. As you can see, these lead pewter figurines, here's a dwarf on a helicopter. Strange combination, but you can see a lot of detail, and a lot of time went into making these figurines. That also came from a deceased estate. The gent died, his kids didn't want them, nobody was interested, and off they went to the second-hand store, and lo and behold, I walked in there and paid the equivalent of about $20 US for the whole lot. So it just makes you wonder what's going to happen to all these things that we collect when we do eventually kick the bucket. I know my wife jokingly always says, the day I pass on, the whole lot goes through to the auction or to hospice, one of the two. And thinking about that, I just want to dedicate this video to a very good friend of mine, George Anfield. He passed on a few years ago, He had a great love for video games, and one of his favorite consoles was the Commodore 64. Or computers, 8-bits. Was the Commodore 64 over there, and then the PC. He was a real big-time gamer. I think the best thing that we can do is maybe have a friends list, or have a list somewhere that our loved ones will know that if we do pass on, that all these computers and this is just part of the collection. Most of the weird and rare collectibles I have are still in the garage in boxes. That if we do pass on, that these people can be contacted so that they can have an opportunity of owning these, or even donating them to them. Even though none of us try to think of what's going to happen to ourselves one day, we're not getting any younger, so maybe that's food for thought. So guys, plan wisely what's going to happen to your collections one day. Okay, cheers from me.